Hello and welcome to another LeetCode video. So today we're on day 5 of the JavaScript challenge, filter elements from array. And before we dive into that, I just wanted to do a little bit of an explanation of what an array actually looks like in JavaScript. So if you have an array like this, in JavaScript, it's actually an object under the hood. And so what this will actually look like is at key 0, we have number 1. At key 1, you have number 2. And then at key 2, you have number 3. So it's actually just key value pairs, and then it has other properties like a length, and then it probably has some other property saying that like it is an array, but it's pretty much an object. And so when you push and pop, you just reassign keys and values, and you change the length, and then you probably want to have an index of like where the next element should go and stuff like that. So just wanted to show that. And so now that we know that, you can actually do a couple things that are kind of interesting. So you can actually say like const array equals this. And now what you can actually do, believe it or not, is you can say like you can give it other properties. And then you can print that. So if you do something like this, think about what that should do. Right, so it prints black. Now think about one more thing, what this should do. So we talked about this in a previous video. We didn't actually show it though, and this is why like it'll behave as unexpected. So for I in array, actually don't want this. I think I want like this. And then it should be let I in array. There we go. Okay, so if we do that, then let's think about what this will do. So just think about what this will actually print, knowing that it's an object. Let's take a look. So they're actually all strings because when you do this, you're not actually accessing the index, you're accessing the key that's an index, and the key is a string. And so when you actually use this index for other things, that's why you want to convert it to a number, like what I did in the previous problem. But yeah, this is generally not recommended to go through arrays. It's the slowest, and you can definitely like because you're using a key and not an index, it can definitely be buggy. Okay, so now let's talk about one more thing. Let's talk about the filter function. And so in the filter function, there is a native JavaScript filter function. So if you have an array like this, you can actually call r.filter, and you typically give it a callback. And so what the callback usually wants to have is a function that evaluates to true or false, ideally. And so you want a function that evaluates to true or false, and then what's that callback is going to be passed in when you do this r.filter is this callback will actually be given 3 elements. It will be given the element, so element, the index, and the array. So it'll have access to all 3 of these, and I think I talked about this before in JavaScript. Even though we can see that in these examples, this only takes 1 value or 2 values or so on. If you give a callback too many, like if let's say a callback takes 3 elements, right? So it takes this, first, second, third, and then it does some stuff. If you call it with not enough elements, so if you call it like this, then third will actually be undefined. So every value you don't pass in when you call it will be undefined. But if it only takes 1 value and you give it 2 or 3, then what will happen is it'll just use the first one out of the ones you give it. So JavaScript is kind of weird because you can just do a lot of things and it won't break. Like in most languages, when you don't match the number of parameters with the number of arguments, it will break, right? Like if callback takes 1 argument and you give it 2, it's going to give you a problem. But in JavaScript, it won't. Okay. So let's take a look at our first actually example of how we can implement this filter, and we're going to actually implement it using the native array filter, right? So we can just say return, and then the way it works is it's r.filter, and then we can just give it the function, and we don't actually have to give it any more parameters because, like I said, when you call the native filter, it will give this function the array, the index, and it'll give it the element in the array, the index of that element, and the entire array itself. So like for this function, it takes the element and the index, and that's going to be passed in. So if we call this, you see that works. And so for like these examples, like this first one is, n is greater than 10, so 20 and 30 are greater than 10, then I equals 0, meaning the index equals 0, so the only index that's true is this one. And then n plus 1 is, so it's saying 0 should be filtered out because that's not going to be a truthy value. And so that's how it evaluates. It needs to evaluate for truthy values. So what that's pretty much going to do is a truthy value means any value that, like, if you do this, something, this needs to evaluate to true. And so the things that evaluate to true are anything except for null, undefined, an empty string, and 0, I believe. Maybe there's like one more or something, but these are the main ones that you're going to be using. So these values will all be false, kind of similar to Python, right? Like in Python, if you do like if not, so a null value will evaluate to false, this will evaluate to false, this will evaluate to false, and there is no undefined in Python. So it's kind of similar. So this is one way to do the filter. Now let's think of like how we would actually manually do the filter, because they don't want you to use a pre-built filter. Okay, so what we need to do, and by the way, you need to recognize that this array filter doesn't actually modify the array, it returns a new array. And so if you actually wanted to modify the array, you'd have to say something like this. You'd have to actually change it. Okay. So what we can do is we can manually like create a filter, right? So the way to do that is going to be we can make a new array. So we can make constant result. And then we can just say we would have to loop through every element in array. And then if the function returns true, then we would push it, right? So that would make sense. So we would loop through every element. So like for, and we could do this in a couple of ways. Like I said, you don't want to really use a for in. So let's just use a for of maybe, of r. So actually we don't really want to use a for of here. I think we just want to use a normal for loop because we do need to have the index. Let's just do a normal for loop. So equals 0, I is less than r.length, plus plus. And then we can just say if function on the array at the index, and we're going to give it the index, then we can push back that value, right? So we can say, let's push it back. So res.push ri. Okay, and now we can return the result. Okay, so that works as well. So this is how you would create a custom filter. And filter is going to be one of the common functions you're going to actually use in JavaScript. There's like filter, reduce, and map is going to be like the most common ones. Now we can do this a couple other ways, right? So we can have an arrow function. So this can just be a function like this, takes an array, a function, and then does this. So this should work as well. And you typically want to use constant, not var as well. So there are a couple of other ways we could do this. We could actually pre-allocate memory and then size down our array. So what that's going to look like is it's going to look like, remember we can make a new array with array.length. And then what we can actually do is we can just have an index, right? So we can just say let index equals 0. And then if this is true, then what we need to do is we need to actually not push. So we need to say a couple things here, right? Like essentially what we're doing is we're just writing into a new index, and then every time we write, we move our index up. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay. And so what we need to do here is we need to say, so we need to say result at whatever index we're currently at equals array I, and then we need to increment the result, right? And we can actually do that, or we actually need to increment the index. We can do this in a one-liner with a postfix operator, like I discussed before. And so then finally what we do is now our result actually is going to be the same size as the array, but the problem is there's a bunch of elements that are like undefined essentially. And so what we need to do is we need to figure out how many elements we need to delete. And so that's going to be while whatever the index is less than, we actually, I think, want to pop backwards. Yeah, we want to pop backwards. So we can have a for loop and pop backwards, because essentially what we have, like let's say our array is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we filtered, and now our new array is like 1, 2, 3. So our index is actually over here, and we need to pop backwards until we hit an element. Yeah, that's what we need to do. Okay, so let's do that. So we can just use another for loop here, and it's going to start at array.length. We probably don't want to actually use a for loop, because we are going to like modify the array as we're doing this. So let's just do it another way. So let's just say index equals array.length -1, and then we can say while result at index does not equal undefined. I believe that'll work because we don't have any values. Let's just pop it. Right? So we can just pop. We don't even do this. We can just say yeah. So we can just say result.pop, and now we can decrement the incorrect index. Okay. Yeah, now let's try this. Let's take a look. Okay, so we do have one extra value, it looks like. So 20, 30, we push twice. Or we could say while result does not equal number. We could say this. This might work. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so just pretty much while the result at the index is not valid, we can pop. So that's one way to do it. And this would be, so this should be, I don't think this will necessarily be faster, but that is just another way to do it. Then the last way to do it is in place. So it's going to be pretty similar to this, right? Except now we just need to record like what index we need to be at. And so the way that would look like is, let's just change this code a little bit. So if this is true, we do need the index. It's going to be tricky though in place, because is it going to be tricky in place? No, it's not going to be tricky in place. Never mind. Yeah, so essentially what we're doing is, like, if we have this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say 1, 3, and 5 are true. What we're gonna have a location to write to, and so every time something is true, we're gonna write to that location, and then we're gonna move it up. So what our new thing is gonna look like is like this, and then we just need to delete this last part. So it's like an easy LeetCode problem, like write from somewhere in an array to somewhere else in an array, and then get rid of the rest. Okay. And so what that's going to look like is, instead of result, we can actually use array here. And then we finally need to do one last thing. And so here, we actually need to keep popping. We need to change this a little bit. So index, we actually need to do an index ---- here. And then we need to say that, so if index is 0, what do we need to do? We just need to return an empty array, because that means we shouldn't have anything. And then otherwise, yeah, I'm not exactly sure if you need it, but let's just do it just to be safe. So we're going to subtract the index. So now the index is the last element that we wrote into. And so what we can say is just while array.length is greater than index +1, we can just keep popping. And I think that should work. This should be array. Yeah. And so essentially what we did is, let me just show that. So let's get rid of this. Okay. So if we have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's say, what's going to happen is we are going to we're going to start writing into here. Let's say 1, 3, and 5 evaluate to true. So when we get to 1, we're going to write to 1. Now we're going to move our write to value over here. And so when we check 2, we're not going to write 2. Then when we check 3, we are going to write 3. So the 3 will be written over here. Now we're going to move our write to value over here. And then when we check 4, we're not going to write. And then 5, we do write. So this will look like this. And our index is here. Our index will be here now. So then I pretty much move the index back here, and I say while the length of the array is too big, let's just keep popping elements until our array is just what we wrote. So you could do that in place as well. And then that would be like the last way to do it, I think. Okay, so I think I went over quite a bit of things in this video, so hopefully you liked it. And if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.